going to introduce the speakers, and we're also going to talk a little bit on why bots. Why are we talking about chatbots? I mean, how ubiquitous are chatbots? And I think we can just start with the basic question, what is a chatbot? Someone wants to speak to that.
So when my friend explains to her 5-year-old that I build robots that live with computers,
right.
Which is kind of true, but it's basically a sort of conversational agent that's capable of doing bidirectional conversation with the user. So for instance, you can like Alexa is a chatbot, right? Google Home is a chatbot. And there are a lot of chatbots that live on messaging platforms as well that can do numerous things for you, such as basic things like customer service to actually content distribution.
I think we're entering a world where conversational interfaces is kind of the bucket term we tend to use. And everybody's used to a visual user interface. That's like your phone or your computer, right? So from visual user interface, you get things like graphic design, web design, user experience. Now we're entering an era of conversational user interfaces. And so these are things like chatbots. And I would add to what Audrey said, just voice bots is something that we do at our Flow is, that's kind of like a smart AI-powered IVR where you call a company, for instance, and they're going to provide you with a menu and a list of options, and you're not talking to a person, you're talking to a robot. So yeah, these would all kind of fall under that conversational interfaces title, and those kinds of things live on the conversational user interface. They require conversation design. And I think we're going to see new versions of them. But for now, it's typically in a little chat window or, as Audrey said, talking to a voice assistant.
Yeah, I guess just opening up to all the panelists, like, are they, in your mind, like, are they all actually women? Are there other chatbots that actually have male identifying? Does it even matter? What do you think?
I mean, I can start off with the history of conversational AI, and the first actual bot was called Eliza. And then after Eliza was Alice. And then there's a bot that a man named Steve Warnick in the UK built called Mitsuku. And she's basically like a virtual girlfriend for a lot of people, and it's been around for 15 years, and it was built on top of Alice. Okay. So if you think about it, going back to the early times, it's always been a female name.
Beginning as early as next year, many people are expected to have more conversations with digital voice assistants than their spouse. So it's taken over, and we want to talk about it because a lot of these bots are actually created by men. Artificial intelligence as a field is predominantly male represented. I think is something only like 6% of those creators are women. So it's interesting because a lot of these bots' voices, a lot of their names, Alexa, they're women.
Right, and they're all built by men. So what's so interesting about it is that just from the very beginning.
Can we come up with a reason why that might be? I mean, is that a weird question to ask? I'm just wondering, like, I know there's statistics that say, like, women have more non-threatening voices, so it's just more palatable, and so people want their technologies to reflect, rather than a total AI takeover, and but someone who can help them and is even nurturing.
So one of the things I like to point out is in the New York City subway station, there's two voices. There's a male voice and there's a female voice. Now the male voice is the one that tells you to stand clear of the closing doors, right? He's authoritative. It's the female voice that tells you what the next stop is. So if you think about that, it's one of those things where I think inherently there's a bias where, if I'm going to train something, I'm a man, I'm going to train it to be a woman. And even like Hanson Robotics, which is this robotics firm that creates very lifelike facial, it's a little creepy. I don't know if you guys see Sophia, she's just a disembodied head. And even with that, all the robots they build are women. And I don't know, I'm not a man, I don't know what goes into this thinking.
I was just going to join in on that and to say that something we were talking about in preparing for this panel is looking at also the history of, going back I love that your friend's child says you make robots inside of a computer, and I think for the layperson's understanding of how this technology works, there's a real clear connection, even though professionals and, you know, craftspeople know what are the differences between, you know, a voice-based assistant and a, you know, a Boston Dynamics like robot. But looking at the way these things are portrayed in fiction and film throughout history, you know, we were talking about Metropolis, like the very first, one of the most iconic images of an automaton, you know, the robot, is a woman.
Right.
And ideas about kind of robots versus humans, and what is this kind of semi-dehumanized laborer, you know, that's providing work and labor and energy, is easily coded as female. And that, you know, I think feminist theory teaches us that there's a reason for that there is a way of displacing, partially this anxiety, that it's less threatening if it's a woman, but also that it reflects aspects of reality that women have usually are in roles of being the caretaker, of being, you know, for cleaning, for education, for childcare, for elder care, for all of these other capacities that easily kind of, there is some blurring of a line, which makes it easy to symbolically place, you know, a female shape onto that idea.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting when we also step back and look at a lot of emerging technologies. When we start to craft with them, we rely on the metaphors around us, the things that we're really historically sort of used to. And so I always think back to, you know, with graphical user interfaces, we started with skeuomorphism, of referencing the objects and re-rendering them from real life and bringing them into the digital space. So I do feel like chatbots are sort of like following that same sort of looping history that we keep performing over and over and over again.
Also, if you think about the companies that made the structure of the companies, or a lot of companies, it's like a lot of women, the people who do the supportive functions is probably majority women, whether it's like assistants, HR, like anything that's supportive.
When we talk about chatbots, we're talking about conversational user interfaces. Some of them may not have a voice output, correct? Like we're including, if we're including the chat message windows, and I was thinking about this as we've been talking in prep for this, but you know, text that you read on the page that doesn't have a voice attached to it or a body attached to it is perhaps not necessarily gendered. And then I was thinking, but actually in those chat windows, you know, there is always a kind of, even a hi, I'm Nancy, can I help you? The bot does have a name. It's not, hi, I'm a chatbot, can I help you?
I know, and that's, to me, that's like such an opportunity, because I guess I think of like some of the graphic designers we teach, and it's like font has such strong associations, and that's where it's like, even if it is just text, we could be challenging that and pushing it even further. And
Right.
instead of using, currently it's like default, everything looks the same, and instead we could introduce this huge variation within just that simple like chat window.
Interesting. There are other gender neutral, but I mean, I think Alison, you were speaking about Q. There's a gender neutral voice. Yeah. I mean, what does gender neutral even sound like as a voice?
It sounds like a voice.
Yeah.
After we talked about it, I went and I listened to Q, and I was like, it's not, you know, I don't think like, wow, this voice, I can't tell if it's a man or a woman. I'm just like, it sounds kind of synthetic, you know, but it doesn't, I'm not in awe that it doesn't sound like a male or female voice. I just kind of think, oh, it sounds like a synthetic voice. Totally.
Interesting.
Well, this was something we were talking about in terms of also between different cultures and also different evolving notion of a gender spectrum, that the idea, I think there's so much possibility to explore with new forms of voice assistants or chatbots that are deliberately a non-binary, and even I think non-binary and humanoid is one thing, but also just like non-binary and non-human, like trying to really understand what is a kind of, well, not even personified, but I guess agentified, like entity that could, and I think maybe what this all really shows is that humans still really want some kind of a human form to grapple with, even conceptually, even if it's before going to the point of it being something that is completely, really the voice of the machine,
Right.
Or,
as a machine.
Or companies think that
Right.
users want that,
Right.
right?
Something really interesting. Instead of naming their voices, because with Google you actually have like 5 or 6 different options on how you want the assistant to sound. And instead of giving the names, like you would in your GPS, Jane, or John, they use colors. So it's the orange voice, the pink voice, the green voice, and I think that's the first step in terms of eliminating some sort of gender bias. Like my Google Home is set to a man's voice, just because why not, right? You can do stuff for me too.
I really like what you bring up, though. It's about the categorization. Just by simply changing the labeling within that system, how it can have these like ramifications down the line. And like just saying green, well, how does that spur then additional like design sort of foundations around that? Like, I think that's really interesting just to like, I mean, I don't know if color is the best way to like start to shift it, but it is a starting point, that we could then, yeah, that's huge just to drop the naming. And like, I get excited about like the next step of that, because it's like, is color the right way to like the right kind of addressing of green to then a vocal tone? I don't know if that's like a one-to-one, but I get excited just about that step that you're bringing up.
Yeah, and I really think the example of having color align with choice, stripping away gender and making that choice instead about something that's fairly objective. What Google's really doing there is creating intentionality. And so, that's why I think Q is so exciting. The point of Q, which was created by Vice Denmark's creative shop called Virtue, Q was created to give us an option. So just as you can choose from those options for Google Assistant, we have no option when it comes to Siri, and we have no option when it comes to Alexa. And the real here, at least I think from a conversation design perspective, is not that gender is inherently problematic when it comes to these AIs. It's just that it's typically not intentional. And you want to think about the history of why those AI voices are predominantly female. Of course, it's rooted in pretty classic gender bias, but it's also rooted in bad research. And a piece of research that came out in 1980 from the US Department of Transportation that said that airplane pilots, preferred a female voice. They were more likely to listen to a female voice, to take orders from a female voice, and also there were no women in the cockpit. So it was the voice that differentiated itself simply by that fact. And it's all just really an excuse in this day and age. And that research, by the way, was debunked because those same pilots were given the option of a male voice and a female voice, and they listened no differently. They didn't execute differently. It was just their perceived expectation of how they would execute. So all this is really to say, like, gender can be a tool, and for an experience focused on women's voices or for a product that's meant for men, in those situations, you choose gender strategically. But a genderless voice, while it sounds kind of creepy today, it can really align well with the purpose of a chatbot or an AI if that purpose has nothing to do with basically anthropomorphizing the bot.
Interesting. So you're saying once the voice becomes maybe more normalized, people are more familiar with that sound of voice, it could be more integrated into different companies' customer service capabilities?
Yeah. Okay. I think just as we interact all the time with objects and things and voices that are non-human, I think the IVR example is a big one. Sometimes when you pick up the phone and talk to an IVR, it may be a woman's voice, but you're not thinking about a woman, you're thinking about a robot.
It actually, as we're talking, it's making, I just sort of had this realization, kind of differentiating between, because we've talk a lot about representation of women in, in technology, well, in not just in technology, but everywhere, in all fields. And, it's really, there are all of these systemic obstacles to, getting more women working in AI. It's totally trivial to change the voice of an agent. So it's literally changing a flag. So if these voices are available, like if this is the authoritative voice, all you have to do is just press a button. It doesn't take any extra work to to change the gender or to apply some of that skinning to it. And so I think in a lot of ways, if people are going to be interacting with chatbots more, it's an opportunity to affect the representation, to actively affect the representation of all across the spectrum of everything. Again, not just gender, but again, the things that might be communicated through different kinds of language and word choice. That's a little bit harder to apply, but just the voice, in terms of what the qualities of the voices, it's totally trivial to change that.
So one of the things that we do, I'm a developer, so I don't really, the way I think, and I'm a marketer as well, what we think about is who our audience is. So listen, if it's Sephora, we're not going to have a male persona for that, right? Because it's a little strange, unless it's a makeup artist that's really well known, which has been done too. So it's the context of it, the voice assistant actions or skills that we built. We built one for the Grammys, and we actually removed Google's voice from it, and have a voiceover artist who's actually someone who works at the Grammys, and that's a male voice. And it's interesting because what we do is a trivia game, and so he brackets the dynamic content that changes out all the time, which is a game. And it's kind of a neat experience because it's the first time you kind of hear a male voice, and it's kind of fun. And then we just recently released another action for Gallo Wines, and it's called Rose Your Way. So obviously that target audience is for females.
Because it's what they know, it's what they're comfortable with. It's like talking to your girlfriend, right?
Exactly, and we actually use a voiceover artist for that as well. Okay. We really try to work toward removing the actual voice of the machine to make it a little more personal. Because for us, our reason is we just want people to interact with it, but people are used to what they're comfortable with.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it gets a little complicated though when like the statements that Siri will say if you call her, any derogatory phrase is I'd rather blush, or I guess some of the sentences that they make through that, it's called, I think the AI used is decision tree.
So one of the things we always build in is a profanity filter.
Okay.
Because with brands that are very high profile, you don't want the bot to actually respond if someone says something really mean, and they do that. Human nature is that people generally want to break things. They say some terrible things, but we create these fallbacks, so Siri's a fallback. For us to say, hey, we don't really appreciate that language, like, you want to leave, that's cool. Or sometimes when we build bots, like when I did bots for Disney, we just did not engage. The bot would leave the conversation.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's great. And do you feel like users would get upset? I mean, you saying that it's working then, like users aren't getting upset if they can't yell at Siri and she doesn't quip some cute little ironic phrase, right? Like they just are okay with her exiting the conversation, or him or her? Or how are users reacting to, because I know you guys read the scripts, right, of how users respond to bots and the type of statements they say to bots, and it's the whole reason the UN released that survey on having, a conversation about gender bias and discrimination.
I think maybe we could segue into Tay if you want to kind of go into that experience. So for those of you who don't know, Microsoft released a bot called Tay about 2-3 years ago, and it was supposed to be kind of gender neutral, but it pretty much was, a girl. And she was basically, there's two types of AI, there's supervised and unsupervised. Now everything we do is supervised learning because we really need to control the conversation. So it's a little bit more decision tree based. There is AI in there which matches patterns of intent, so knowing if you're saying yes or no in different ways, we understand that as well. But with Tay, they left it unsupervised, which meant that users would influence what she thought. So there was a coordinated 4chan attack, and Tay became I don't know, a misogynistic, Nazi-loving bot within hours.
And that happened on, I think, Twitter, right?
Yeah,
They released her on Twitter and other platforms. Okay. And
The thing is, though, that I think Tay was a great example. Like, I think in a way it was successful, and it was actually launched by Microsoft Research, not the kind of consumer arm of Microsoft. So it's done by small research teams, and they launch things and prototype them live within the public realm. So I think in that case, and I go like, it was super successful of proving that we like need to watch.
we need help.
You know? And so in a way, it's like I feel for like Tay and the team who built it, because it was quickly taken down. But if anything, and like everyone talks about really negatively, but I actually think it's like a really great example that we all are learning from.
So Tay would
and I think that Tay is also critical to bring up, specifically to the point you just made, because it was released by enormous multinational enterprise, right? So this is what's interesting about those of us who work with brands versus those of us who are researchers or kind of independent and not aligned with any sort of client forces. But I mean, Tay had to be taken down immediately after the fiasco that Audrey described, because Microsoft had a brand to protect, right? But we've worked with some of the programmers and conversation designers who worked on Tay, and it's really interesting to those folks and hear their pain when Tay was taken down, because frankly, Tay was a vehicle for hate, but it was also a vehicle for some of the best learning that could possibly be done on conversational AI to date. And if Tay had been left up, I would argue that we'd have an incredible base of data for helping to eliminate that situation from ever happening again.
Interesting.
But for obvious reasons, Microsoft didn't want to perpetuate that kind of hate. So what we lose is data. And I will say, from some of our own bots, we released a bot for NBA All-Star Russell Westbrook, who's a player for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And, he's not a woman, but he is a Black man. And the amount of hate and racism that came through immediately upon launching the bot was just a reminder that robots are a form of technology, chatbots are a form of technology, and all technology inspires some fear in humanity, and it results in this kind of backlash and in this desire to break things. So I think that's something we're going to be grappling with for probably the next 5 to 10 years until these forces and these technologies are part of our everyday life.
Yeah, it tells you artificial intelligence, as we see now, is not quite artificial at all. It's all programmed by humans. It's basically just automating something, right? So there's an argument that like a washing machine could be an AI, because what it did was eliminate hand washing.
Right. There has to be some difference between like automation, automative technology, and an entity that can like sort of make or imitate like decision-making processes. But at the same time, the washing machine knows how to, rinse and repeat, so I guess it is doing that. So I guess you're right. I'll go back to what I said. Yeah. Okay. Washing machines are artificially intelligent. Officially. I hope that's what everybody, that's the one takeaway from this panel. Yeah. I guess I want to talk about why, like going back to, chatbots, like what are they? Why do they matter? When we interact with new technology, I think it sort of like throws back humanity in our face. It's almost like a reflection. And so the reason why I'm so keen on talking about chatbots is because if they did respond like the way Audrey is asking them to respond, she's saying, well, they just leave the space. They get away from trolls, right? If they respond in a way that's almost, I don't know, not so much empowering for them, but is a role model for how we can communicate with one another as women, or how we can communicate with one another in general. Like, I guess my question is, how can we use chatbots now to help improve social behavior and social interaction? Is it possible? I mean, they're going to be our main interlocutors, for many, it's happening already now, and it's just going to grow.
I think what you're bringing up is companies are going to be asked to, or they're already doing it, is embedding their moral values within them. So they're going to have to sort of like be consider those as like design attributes in a way. I don't necessarily think they're thinking about it in that way, but that's what we're experiencing, is some sort of sense of like the morals within that corporation.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would just raise that we've already seen Google Assistant and Alexa. For anyone in the audience who has children, you've probably thought about this or used it, but Google Assistant has this functionality called Pretty Please. And it allows you to have your children interact, or any child interact with Google Home and ask for things nicely, right? So exactly to your point, it's the codification of morality into our interactions with AI. And Amazon Alexa has a similar thing where you kind of have to say please and thank you to access skills. And it's funny, if we can hold those AIs to a higher standard to make sure our kids have manners, why can't we hold them to a higher standard on gender bias, on racial bias, on general factors of inclusion, on language that is more inclusive, on trying to eliminate ableism from an experience? It just shows you that there has to be a market force asking for these things.
And we're doing this panel because we're saying there is a market. We all care. We'd prefer to have more enlightened conversations with bots rather than, I guess, the extreme range of responses.
Right now, I'm teaching a studio with InView, this social network, and it's avatar based on the mobile cell phone. And a lot of the students were commenting on the popularity of certain avatar shapes, like everyone's saying, oh, everything's very like Kim Kardashian-ified. And InView responded saying that, in their tool, you can make the body shape any way you want, and that this is what the users are choosing. And most of their user base are female. And so it's just really interesting, is that from this sort of surface read of the network, that you would assume certain biases that were built within that tool, and maybe there are a little bit of some, but it's just interesting that we're like, you can go through the history of InView and see trends of body shape, and that just happens to be the one that right now culturally women are choosing. And so yeah, it's just kind of fascinating in terms of like representation and women sort of wanting to be represented in a certain way, especially within these more fantasy spaces like games or InView.
Could you talk a little bit more about the class you teach and the curriculum?
Yeah, so right now we are teaching a class also called AI and Agents, and what we do is get students right in the first 4 weeks engaging and building bots or chatbots, or what we call just agents. And what we use as a tool, Unity, which is for game development, but they're all designers or artists utilizing it. So it's really interesting for them to engage with the ML toolkit that they've made available in the past year or two, to train an agent, and then to really consider like what is the representation of them, from multi-sensory representation. So whether should it be skin, should it not be skin, what is the audio, what is the chat. So we really try and think about like what are all these attributes that go into this agent based on what is that agent's goal, how is it evolving over like a year or 10 years. So we really try and like prompt these discussions, and we're really interested in designers engaging more within this practice.
Interesting.
That's actually really interesting to say, because AI is one of those industries that we actually do use a lot of designers. Conversational designers such as Alison. We use a lot of screenwriters at times, because you can't have an engineer create a conversation. First of all, most of them can't even talk. Right? So you know right away when a bot's coded by an engineer, because it's just a horrible conversation. But we do use the creative aspect of it, which brings to another point, that we talked about, is how many women are in this space. And it's getting more and more, because you don't need to have a traditional AI background for this. There's a lot of thought that goes into an experience, and you have to think about it from a very, UX perspective. How you're responding to this person. Does this conversation make sense? Is it fun? Is it not? Is it something that people want to talk to? And that takes a whole different level, like English majors, screenwriters, you know, creatives, that we bring on board to make it a much better experience along with the technology.
Yep.
So it's, AI I find is actually a little bit more inclusive than maybe some other types of technologies that are out there.
So you're saying
Yeah.
from any background, you can sort of enter that field, like the art world, for instance. Like I'm an artist, and you wouldn't think that person would be the most tech savvy, and I'm not. But that's the point, right?
You know, we want you to make a creative character, a creative
Yeah.
persona.
Yeah, and I think the writing component behind it, I think it's fascinating, the whole history of it. I mean, from Westworld to, right, which has its own interesting narrative arc.
So like some of the film representations, right? How like her and Westworld, you know, a lot of these females are the way they're portrayed versus something like the Terminator,
Right,
which is also a bot.
right. Oh, that's so weird. That's totally true.
Yeah.
Um,
And he's like a badass that goes around killing people, right? So it's like
I was also going to add, I mean, Hal, I think, from 2000 is the kind of, I think, the earliest, to my mind, of a male voice assistant, essentially, which is iconically terrifying, as this totally non-human villain. And maybe that's the thing that in some of the earliest, at least filmic representations of these alternative intelligences, computer intelligences, that the female voice or feminine kind of affect becomes a mask for the machine. Whereas if it's a male voice, somehow it's more clearly
Becomes the machine.
recognizable as a machine, like the Terminator, like Hal. I think that maybe there is a slow but steady evolution and a complication of these. I mean, looking at the more recent, like Ex Machina, there's other, the killer female, the fembot, as well. So I feel like, right? No, exactly. So I think it goes both ways, and I also think of so many of our conversations, the most interesting thing will be to see more filmic and fictional and art representations of non-binary or kind of deconstructed gender as characters and pushing that forward.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think it's so true because all of our references are like popular media, and this has like such a role in, especially like with students, they come in with that in their mind, like I'm going to build her. In like I'm gonna build this from this movie, and I'm like, okay, we need some other examples out there, as a way so that we can like start to imagine other possibilities.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think so. Looking at some of the artists that use actual these technologies, or are kind of doing experimental practice around the edges of it. And are there any people who are specifically in the voice chatbot or assistant side doing things that are really surrealist? To kind of highlight the distance, between what is expected and what are these kind of like the standard scripts that we have, and how, this estrangement of this of what is really happening in the interaction with this chatbot. I can think more like performance based. Yeah.
Go for it, Allison.
Sorry, guys, the delay. No, what Sam just brought up is actually something that we talk about a lot, which is that, like, when you see the way technology and art are intersecting right now, there's a lot of excitement about the visual side of things, which is natural. So there's a lot of VR and there's a lot of AR. Augmented reality experiences can be baked into a chatbot. And there's a great one that exists, probably one of the most recognized chatbots in the world is the one that Sephora created, where you can hold your phone right up to your face and it will apply lipstick or eyeshadow. And it's great. You're trying out the products before you buy, but mostly it's just like a fun thing to take selfies from. These kinds of applications of in-chat experience are really where the sort of verbal and visual can start to intersect. And we're honestly really excited about the Echo Show 5 that just came out, the $90 appliance from Amazon, and it's an Alexa that's connected to a small screen. So these multimodal experiences are going to be used by brands. They're going to be used by anyone who wants to be in your home, talking to you, giving you information. But I would think, I'm not an artist myself, but I would think from an artist perspective, being inside a home is really the most intimate way that you can take your practice and democratize it. And it also is a really incredible way to get your art directly into culture and interact with and speak with the culture in real time.
Interesting. Great. I guess, Jenny, we had, I think that was like so fascinating. And so what you're saying, Alison, is that really the AI game could be anybody's game. Doesn't matter what background you have, doesn't matter how much computer science you know, though maybe some would help. They don't tell you that when you go to school. Like, I didn't know if I had gone to school to be an English major, I could be helping create the personalities for companies, representing companies.
It's very nascent. I mean, it's definitely a newer thing, and that's why I find so fascinating, as I mentioned before, in this field. There was actually an article in the Washington Post a couple years ago about how liberal arts, people in liberal arts are actually going to create personas. Like there was a woman who created a bot named Luca.ai, and she built it because her friend Luca had passed away, and she missed him so much. And so she built an AI, based upon him. And it's interesting to see how this is evolving in terms of creating personas, and that takes a different kind of space in your brain that someone in technology just is simply unable to really convey.
Right. I think the same has happened for humanoid robots. Like a pharmaceutical tycoon's former lover was created in AI, like Bina 48.
Yeah, so he's a very interesting guy, right? I think he's actually a woman now.
Bina? I think Bina's
his wife.
A woman. Oh, okay.
She's
living? Okay, yeah. Cool. I was wondering if the person
woman.
was still alive or not. Yeah. So they weren't immortalized in AI like Westworld or something.
Living.
Okay.
You can watch Chelsea Lately.
Yeah.
The one
okay,
in
totally.
Valley. It's hysterical. Yeah, I would highly suggest that one because she's prominently featured
Interesting.
in it.
Okay, cool.
And another really bizarre reference point in this conversation, does anyone remember Christina Milian? Yes. Thank you. She was a big pop star in probably the early aughts, and believe it or not, Christina Milian ventured into the conversational AI space, and she started a company that I think was called Persona.
Yeah, it's defunct. I can go into that big time, but yeah.
Yeah, so she was creating these kind of like influencer bots that took on the persona of, say, a Kim Kardashian. I don't think it's operating currently, but I also would argue that what she was doing was kind of ahead of its time, and I'm pretty sure that these are going to happen very soon. It's essentially what we did for the basketball player that I mentioned, and we've heard a lot of interest ever since in saying, hey, when there are these people who have multiple brands tied to their name, they have huge fan bases, and they're not going to respond. Their teams even can't respond to all the interest and the excitement and the, what's your favorite color and what do you eat before a game? A bot can do that. It can scale that kind of dialogue.
Yes, thousands of people can be talking to the bot at the same time.
Yeah, I think it makes me think about chatbots are just great fronts for data collection too. 100%. Because I was just thinking about when bringing up the Amazon being embedded in the home and that artists can be embedded in the home, and I'm like, the home is the place where everyone wants information. It is this intimate threshold that now corporations have crossed, and just thinking about that, it's always on, always listening. They're getting tons of data from that, and that we're not even aware, and that some of these chatbots have done answering simple questions of what's your favorite color. It's seemingly quite simple and no harm whatsoever, but then once it scales up, it's ooh, that's suddenly I'm
So for the Sephora bot, that's sort of along the lines of what they wanted to learn was this sort of buying behavior, and it was on a platform called Kik, so it was mostly for teenagers. And they did a very interesting sweepstakes where they asked 3 questions, and the barrier to entry was really just you might win a $100 gift card to Sephora. And the 3rd question was actually open-ended, which was, what is your favorite brand? And it actually ended up being entirely different than what the marketing team thought. So to your point, we do. As my company, a lot of what we do is also obviously sell data points, because the customer wants to know what products people use, what type of hair do they have, what are they buying. And with the Sephora bot, the interesting part of it was that we realized teenagers were really actually more interested in looking like a Kardashian. We thought maybe nail art would be something they were interested in. Turns out contouring is something that they're very interested in, and who knew?
I think there was like an article about how teens would Photoshop themselves. It was like a study, and they all gave themselves like huge eyes and like really prominent cheekbones and like pouty lips. Yeah.
The social media aesthetic, yes.
Right, the
Yeah.
social media aesthetic.
I mean, in Chinese, there's even a term of like social media face is a specific type of look that then is now being kind of, the plastic surgeons also help create, which is slightly different from the Kardashian look. It has a different, this sort of Maytool face. Yeah, but it's slightly different. But yeah, I think any place, like we're bathed in these images and it influences our choices,
Right.
whether we think it is or not, which is really interesting.
That's fascinating. Just what Jenny and Sam just highlighted. There actually is sort of a parallel in conversation design. We call it the stock bot hello. Whenever a chatbot says hi there, it's actually like one of the sort of hallmarks of good conversation design is if you have an error state handling, that's really true to the brand. And then if you have an open phrase, that's really true to the brand. But something that we're finding is just stock. It's used by a lot of brands. It's used by a lot of organizations. Is the bot begins, unless there's some sort of larger question or call to action, it begins with hi there. And it's really interesting. Like you can tell that that's, the writer is trying to mimic a casual conversation between people, but it's also kind of outdated. And there's not a lot of people who, when they see you in person, would say hi there. And so all of a sudden you're creating an aesthetic rather than an actual human interaction. And I think it intensifies the uncanny valley, which for those who don't know is that sort of distance between human interaction and artificial intelligence. It's that gap between us and the sort of uncomfortable feeling we get when we're talking to an AI or experiencing an AI and not realizing yet that it is not human.
Interesting. Great. I think one of the takeaways I just got from this panel that like was off the top of my head is if you can enter the AI industry if you're just a curious person without like a whole computer science background and coding and everything. Like you guys all came from a different fields. I think Audrey, you were in finance.
Yeah, I started off,
Okay.
well, I was an art history major, actually.
Okay.
And then I minored in business and somehow ended up in investment banking. And then found out I was terrible with numbers about 5 years later. And then ended up, in marketing somehow. And then fell into AI. I think it was more of a right place at the right time. Traditionally, someone like me really would have no business being in the AI space because I don't have an advanced computer science degree.
But you're really good at making bots.
Because I'm coming from a different
amazing,
perspective,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm coming from more of a
amazing.
marketing perspective or more human perspective.
Right.
The technology's there. It's always been there. It's just about how you leverage it.
I think the world's changing so fast right now that pretty much anywhere you started from, you can get to where you're going pretty quickly, especially if you go into an industry that's new. I mean, that's even faster.
Yeah.
Like even with games, though, you guys have a lot of creatives.
Yes, and actually before I went into games, I had no gaming background either. I was a psych major, and then now that I'm out of games, like the next things I'm going to be doing is probably like genetics, so you just sort of go, it's okay, especially industries that are very new discoveries and new industries, like that makes it a lot easier, but really like every industry is changing, so.
Well, is the hope also, I wonder if there's parallels between other eras of the web, which is, in the 90s, kind of the people first building platforms, learning coding, developing, and then once there was like Blogger, like it was an easy access kind of low friction entry point for anybody to start blogging and hugely you know, accessible to all kinds of audiences and women and people of color and other communities that were not typically the sort of like cliche, nerdy, white computer science guy. And so expanding and expanding. And I wonder if for this field, that's also what's happening. Other people can enter and creating and shaping these technologies to be more democratic.
I think it's great.
And diverse, yeah.
That's why it's going to be more democratic, is because you're going to have different thinkers that are going to come into the space and really push the boundaries. And that's what I look forward to the most in this space.
So I think once people know more that they could enter it from multiple fields, then
We posted jobs on
Cool.
boards that were from
Yeah.
film schools.
Oh.
We posted at USC Film School
okay.
because that's what we were looking for.
Yeah, and one of our partners who we work with, they build Alexa skills, and then we build the chatbots that go with them. You know, they have pretty specifically sought out comedians. They love to hire comedians because they write quick, snappy dialogue. They get to a punchline, and you know, at the end of the day, chatbots are not trying to interact with us in a truly human sense because they don't want to have a panel discussion like this. You know, they can't interact with multiple people at one time through one bot yet, although that's coming. And soon chatbots will be able to interact with each other. But for now, we really see all these conversations as happening over a short period of time with a very specific goal. And if you can inject a little humor and make it happen quickly, it's great. And you know, by the way, everyone here, everyone in this room and anyone watching can build a bot today. There are all kinds of platforms, and we actually encourage our clients sometimes to check them out and try to build a bot on any of these sort of off-the-shelf platforms. They're not typically where you want to build a bot that you launch for a major brand, but you can build yourself a prototype. And
Yeah,
that's a huge part of this industry is prototyping. It's
I say the same
constant
thing.
prototype.
Yeah, like Chatfuel or ManyChat, you know, there's a lot of hobbyists. So it's basically a very basic like Tumblr or, you know, very easy blogging platform where you can easily create a bot. And I also do encourage, like you, our customers go play around with them because it changes the way you think about the experience. You know, it's not necessarily just a utility function. There's so much more that goes into it.
What do most amateurs use the bot makers for? Like, what kind of bots are they making?
It runs the gamut. I actually don't know these days. I mean, there's so many hobbyists out there. I just met somebody at a dinner the other night who built a bot of himself for his parents to answer all of the questions they have about his dating life.
That's pretty funny.
I think it just exposes that, I mean, I'll speak for myself here. I think that as a human, I do have a lot of conversations that are based on decision trees, and I have a lot of templates for if you're like a socially awkward person, Jenny and I were just laughing, like I would totally be like, hi there.
So sort of like if you could wear the same clothes, like it's almost like people have uniforms that they go to for social events, or they're going to wear that cocktail dress where it's like, oh, I'm going to have that response lined up.
Ways to automate decision-making process and templates. I have some templates for my email. And actually, I think that Google, when Gmail rolled out that functionality of having these kind of pre-selected choices, suggestions of things you could respond with, which at first seemed so, I don't know, bizarre and but ultimately, a lot of times when I looked at the choices, those were things that I would have responded with anyway. It was very good, obviously, right. And then I got over the awkwardness of it, and it's, you know, so it's. I think what's interesting is the technology potentially shaping our responses and conversation trees to be more like the logic of these platforms in the first place.
Yeah, and if you take this beyond a hobby and you really want to get into it, I mean, you can go beyond decision trees. And something that we're constantly pushing for is for people to think more about bots as a circular experience than as a linear one. You know, that's how you create richer conversations, but also we've seen hobbyists build with this kind of circular model. It's what we use for all of our clients. And if you use it correctly, basically what you can do is just democratize information. And if you have some programming background, or you're using a really rich tool, or you want to team up with somebody and just, you know, meet them on the internet, you can plug into APIs. I mean, we're building something that is not for a client that is simply because it's a tool we truly believe needs to exist that will plug into the API of Congress, and it'll allow you to surface all the bills running through Congress at any given time. And then you can toggle which kind of bills you want to see based on an interest area, like the environment or children or healthcare. Bots can do really big things like this in very small and specific ways. Like they can democratize information or make democracy accessible on a day-to-day basis. And I would encourage everyone that, if there's something that you find is obscured or that is annoying and you have to do it all the time, consider using a bot to solve that problem.
So going back to that, there's a bot called ResistBot, which is very much in line with what you're talking about. And what it does is it's pretty basic. I mean, it asks you where you live, and it connects you to your congresswoman or congressman. It automates letters that you can send. So there are multifunctionals, like content creation is a really big one because a lot of content can be pushed out by bots. And that's like another great example is like Quartz has a really great bot. It's not bi-directional, but I think the writing is really on point and it's pushing out information and content to you. And I like it because it gives me stuff that I'm interested in reading about. So that becomes another thing for creators to live on because you then again have another platform for distribution.
I have one quick question about your classroom setting. Have you ever had a student create a bot that just exists that doesn't have like a particular function, but I think Sam, you touched on it, sort of is there just to be almost like a prototype that is surreal or is a combination of different sort of elements of different bots, but doesn't actually lead towards a particular function or goal? Almost like a bot that's like an art piece.
Yeah, no, I think we encourage a lot of students to make those types.
And why is that? Of just the bat?
Well, mostly because it serves a purpose, because it is showing this another type of representation or another type of use for this technology that isn't, they couldn't think of right from the beginning of the class. And I think that's sort of the point is we all have these ideas in our heads when we first arrive or we first hear about chatbots or AI or agents. It's all these associations that we're sort of critiquing right now. And I think through that the build process, you kind of hit reality really quickly. And it sort of like washes away all those associations because you're just dealing with these like very fundamental things of like, how do I get this thing to learn and remember? Like, we just have students like, I think one, Eli, like he created a platform that just caught cubes all day. And it was just like, we got so excited. We were like, it got better, and it was just like, you get so thrilled, but it's so hard just to get a platform like another cube to catch another cube, and like, so by going and hitting the realities of training like learning curriculum is super interesting, and how that spans over time. So we talk a lot about with students is like, we're so used to designing for like the second or the few minute interaction or user experience, but really we have to extend beyond and think about like, okay, in 10 years, if this agent is still around, like how good will it be or what new things does it learn? So it's, we do a lot of that of just like these very basic sort of forms that like a cube, it's sort of like we never get to necessarily like, okay, should that cube be, what's the gender of that, or anything like that. It's just the basics of how do you teach it? How do you teach it to learn to do a task?
So the bot is a cube and the cube bot catches cubes?
Yeah.
Meta.
It's very meta,
Just
right?
That works.
But you ask like, okay, do you ever like get to this point? It's like, oh yeah, maybe sometimes we never get to that next step. It's just hard enough just to do the training to have another cube catch another cube. It's like so hard. Right. And I think that's what's so important is that we're like, we sort of say AI or agents are so smart and they know everything. And we're like, it's so hard just to do this very basic task. Right. And that like quickly kind of skims away this like overgeneralization of like, they know everything or super intelligent.
It's all trained. It's all trained. And the more conversations our bots have, the smarter they get as it's training our platform. Obviously, we do have a degree of, supervised learning that we do. So the bot comes out of the box already knowing certain things. For instance, when we built a bot for the Grammys, the bot had to understand the difference between Beyonce and Jay-Z, or, Selena Gomez versus Selena. And there was a lot of training that had to be done because sometimes the bot would get confused. But as you talk to it more, it's gathering more data points. And with those data points, it is learning. And it's learning that these responses should go to this particular pattern, or, so.
Yeah, and I think it's like it brings up like new roles as creatives or designers or authors of agents, is that like it is a collaborative experience, and like that's what takes so long, is that you have to train and then you hit play and then you're like, that's not what I wanted, and then you have to do it again and again and again and again, so that like iterative process, it's just like so apparent within the crafting.
So
of
the
any of these
singularity
agents.
is not tomorrow.
Oh, gosh, no.
I'm just triple checking on that. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Was a
and I would
concern.
say if anyone wants to explore a bot that was created by a creative and not for a brand, and really started out with no purpose but now has one, there's an incredible bot on Twitter called TinyCareBot. It's just at TinyCareBot. And the whole point of the bot is created by this guy, Johnny Sun, who's a screenwriter. So he clearly has the chops to create an engaging experience, but the whole point of that bot evolved from the beginning as something that was supposed to exhibit empathy, and he was trying to kind of break down the walls we have in our minds between artificial intelligences and humans being like feeling and unfeeling. But now it's an amazing bot, and I check it on Twitter almost every day because the whole point of it has become to tell us to take care of ourselves. So it says things like, I mean, this makes us sound like we're insane. It says things like, look up from your computer, or go outside, and we've reached a point in humanity and in technology where sometimes we have to hear those things, and we actually have to hear them from a bot.
Yeah, I think it's those simple things that it helps you kind of notice, like I was thinking of another project a student built. She was prototyping an autonomous vehicle, and like it all sounds very logical to us to say like, oh yeah, you should teach it first thing is to like avoid obstacles, and you were like, yes, definitely do that first. And so she did that, and then it's just in the middle of the screen like this. It's like terrified to go anywhere. So it's like it doesn't even fulfill its first purpose, which is to like go, like to drive. And so it's just these kind of funny things that's sort of like very obvious, and that, it becomes really apparent that you're like, oh, that's really hard, is just
Right.
how to avoid obstacles well, not totally so that you could still go forward, but it's somewhere in the middle of that.
I was just going to add that there are an amazing amount of creative Twitter bots that are usually a very short interaction period. So it is, like you tweet at a bot, it tweets back to you. The TinyCareBot I've seen, somehow for me that feels even more dystopian, even though it's themed around self-care. There's something very dark about it. My personal favorite is the medieval death bot. So when you tweet at that, it tweets back at you. Someone has fed it a corpus of all this material about ways people died from the year 1400 to 1700. So it's like, a pig fell on your head in the village well or something. And it's, it's really just expansive and creative and surreal in a way that's quite cool. But I think what's interesting is Twitter and some of the best Twitter bot makers, there's been, a crisis in the past few years because of the way that Twitter, when they change their API, it affects the way that all of these things work. And I think one problem they were trying to firewall against is having when two of these bots somehow get in a conversation with each other, and they'll just keep going forever. And so there was once one of them that tweets out stars, I think, like some kind of Unicode, like cool stars, and then another one that does like a desert sky, and there were just these two non-human entities
in an infinite
infinite loop of like bizarre art pieces to each other, which I think is kind of amazing.
There are bots that actually talk to other bots. It's like, for instance, if you have a bot, and I'm going to go back to a utility, there are bots that actually, there's a human interfacing side, and there's a side that talks to like in a system. Like, let's say I need to track my package, right? So I ask that bot how to track a package, but that bot has to go talk to another bot to figure out where that package is, and then that bot comes back to tell you. So bot-to-bot interactions also happening behind the scenes. So just know that that's already happening, and sometimes there's multiple agents behind it, depending on where the information needs to be pulled from.
What happens if they get stuck in a loop?
Listen, everything breaks, right? Everything breaks. But those are so utilitarian that they're really not designed to break. It's strict decision tree, right? There's only a few ways that it has options to go. Of course it's gonna break. Everything breaks.
2 minutes. Okay. Oh, I have a question real quick. What if like we do need to make a bot that people just need to yell at, and
Well, I think there was an article that came out that said people are more comfortable talking to a bot therapist than an actual therapist because it felt less judged.
And they are less judged.
The thing looks like, is there a question?
There is one called Wobot, I think, that is a therapist bot.
okay, so this bot exists,
Yes.
and people yell at the bot.
Well, I mean,
We
possibly.
don't. Okay.